Hello, I'm Dr. David Clark. Welcome to this Viva Learning webinar, the Modern Injection Molded Class 2. You know, it's a pretty interesting time, as you know, and my practice, like a lot of yours, is shut down right now. And so the one thing that I think it affords us is the opportunity to invest in ourselves. And so I'm glad that you're here to learn about the modern Class 2 and injection molding. I think it matters more than ever as far as our ability to deliver something that's going to be comfortable and permanent with direct restorative. And I'll share a little story. I had a patient come into my practice, had a Class 2 done. She had no pain and before the procedure, and after the procedure was done, she had pain every day, a 9 out of 10 pain every time she got cold on the tooth. 3 months had gone by, and finally she came in, and we had to do endodontic therapy. And that patient is not going to go back to her previous dentist because I think she feels like that the doctor failed her. And the bottom line is, if a patient comes in to our practice and has no pain, I think they have an expectation that they're going to be able to leave without pain. So that's one of the goals of the webinar that we're going to be delivering for you today. As the webinar goes along, go ahead and ask questions, make comments. We're going to have a nice question and answer period at the end of the webinar where we'll be able to have a nice conversation about a lot of these topics. One of the other neat things that you'll be able to do at the end of the webinar is to order, at least in the United States, you'll be able to order a live remote hands-on kit. So all the things that you're seeing here, you'll actually be able to order. You'll do a live hands-on class along with me, and you'll be able to send photographs of the treatments that you do on the Dentiform, and we'll be able to evaluate your treatment along with all the other doctors and share. And I have to tell you, some of the doctors that have taken a couple of these live remote hands-on classes thought it was one of the best hands-on classes they'd ever seen. So I'm excited that you'll be able to really really jump in and get a real feel for this, the difference between injection molding and traditional Class 2 composite. For those of you that are not ready for that, or if you're outside the United States, you can set up virtual lunch and learns where 3M or BioClear can send you a small kit and you can work through that. Either one of those is a great experience. So I look forward to your comments at the end. Let's get started. So we want to talk about depth of cure. We want to talk about the shrinkage stress, some of the sort of voodoo science that people think about shrinkage stresses. We want to talk about how we can get away from having voids in our restoration, which is a real problem with hand manipulation. We want to reduce postoperative sensitivity. It's still a problem. I have lots of doctors say that they're having problems with postoperative sensitivity. At the end of the day, the matrix and the wedge and the separator create the shape that creates the restoration. So these things matter. And so we're going to talk about the tough Class 2s, not just the easy ones, but the tough Class 2s that are near bone level. In the old days, I used to look at a deep Class 2 in my schedule, and it would create all kinds of stress. And now when I see these deep cavities, I get excited. I can't wait to do some of these tough ones. So it's been a real game changer. We want to talk about creating compression joints. And so the thing that's interesting about dentistry is we spend a lot of time talking about chemistry when in reality we really ought to be talking about engineering. So this is two basic principles that you have to understand. Number one, we have compression joints. A compression joint is very safe, like a gold onlay. The more you bite on it, the better the gold onlay. With Roman aqueducts, where they had these stones in the arch, these were compression joints and they last for hundreds of years. Now, a tension joint, on the other hand, is high risk. When we have a tension joint, it doesn't take much to break that joint, and it requires very careful adhesion. We want to build compression joints whenever we can. Chemistry is okay, but engineering is something we can really count on. So compression joints, and that's a topic that we'll cover again and again in the curriculum with modern composite. All right, nature's mistake. Some natural teeth have a deep continuous groove in them, and these particular teeth are high risk for fractures. We don't want to make deep continuous grooves in our composite. I know we were trained in dental school to put all this deep anatomy in our materials. That's okay in gold. We do not want to put deep continuous grooves in a brittle material. A deep continuous groove in a brittle material, when you study engineering, is essentially a crack. So we don't want to put that kind of anatomy in the tooth. And when you look at the studies, there are no studies to date linking secondary and tertiary chicken scratches in a tooth to actual mastication. Mastication is a neuromuscular activity. We just need hard surfaces that bang together. So putting deep grooves in the tooth makes us feel like we're a great dentist, but it doesn't help the patient, and it certainly is poor engineering. All right, so we want to create this Venn diagram. And so what happened was when in 1890, when G.V. Black, who was a consummate scientist, he put together a Venn diagram of a perfect filling material, which was amalgam at the time. We had a wooden wedge, a Tafelmeyer, and a perfect cavity. And that cavity preparation was a mortise and tenon preparation. And today, the cavity preparation for amalgam is basically the same. It hasn't changed. In 2018, we'd like to be able to have a new Venn diagram where everything has changed. The cavity preparation, the filling material, the matrix wedge and separator. The problem is we've never moved all of the components over at the same time. And so the Venn diagram has been broken for the past 50 years in dentistry. So as we look at the transformation between the G.V. Black cavity preparation on the left, the slot preparation, which is really better and then worse than the G.V. Black prep in the middle, and then the cavity on the right is the Clark Class II or the Infinity Edge cavity preparation that requires the injection molding process to fill. You can't condense or layer a composite in this, what is essentially a pouch. So one of the problems with the schools and one of the problems with people making the composite is because we as dentists can't decide what the cavity looks like, the composite should really serve the cavity preparation. And because the cavity preparation is all over the map, the composite manufacturers are struggling to keep up. So we really can't decide what it should look like. So when we look at a G.V. Black prep, and the schools, some of them still love to teach this because it teaches a certain hand skill and it looks elegant to the doctor's eyes. It's something about that preparation people love. The problem is it's not good for composite, leads to tooth fracturing. And then we sort of did a G.V. Black Light. We created a slot preparation that weakens the tooth less, but ask yourself, is this a compression joint? Is this a compression joint or is this a tension joint? So the slot preparation is a tension joint and they're a high risk for failure. So what happens is, unfortunately, a lot of doctors and dental schools go back to the G.V. Black prep because the fillings are falling out. And it's not bad adhesion, that's a tension joint, which is very high risk. So when we take a look at the Clark Class II, there's a bunch of things that we're gaining when we get away from any mechanical retention. Number one, we're maximizing the enamel bond. We'd like to see our enamel bond at 70%. When you look at the G.V. Black prep, less than 50% of the preparation is in enamel. And so we don't need mechanical retention for adhesion. It really, mechanical retention some of the time just keeps the filling from falling out when it's debonded. So one of the things that's neat about the Clark Class II is because we clean the tooth and we remove all the biofilm, our new extension for prevention means we're going beyond the old margin. The tooth is going to grow. We're going to extend the body of the filling to areas that are easy to maintain and easy to monitor for recurrent caries. All right, so here's a case that was posted on the internet. You know what's funny about this case? I'm going to bring my little wand in here. This was a slot preparation that fell out just a year later, but look at the one area where the composite is still stuck to the tooth. This is great. This is great. The one area where the composite is stuck to the tooth is what they call flashing, which we used to think was a bad thing. But it's interesting that that composite, the only composite that's still stuck to the tooth, wasn't even supposed to be there. This is, this is in the old world of G.V. Black with butt margins, that's excess, it's a bad thing. It was interesting when we moved to the Infinity Edge cavity preparation, those areas are one of the great strengths of the restoration. So we're going to turn a liability, which was flashing, into an Infinity Edge. The problem with this cavity that was filled, that was an accident. He didn't mean to have the material there, and yet that's the only part of the material where it's still bonded. All right, so in enamel we trust. So when we take a look at these cavity preparations, the Clark Class II has significantly changed the enamel-dentin ratio. And a lot of us that have been doing dentistry for a while, we trust in enamel. In enamel we trust. So let's take a look at some of the studies that have been done on porcelain laminates. This is a great study that looked at a large number of porcelain laminates bonded to enamel. And not only was it bonded to large areas of enamel, but those enamel rods were bonded to at 90 degrees to the enamel rod. So we're engaging the enamel rod in a really nice direction. There are some other studies that show a great up to 95% retention rate at 10 years, which is a great survival rate. The interesting thing about the study is when you start to look at porcelain veneers that are bonded to lesser amounts of dentin, in other words, let's say 50% enamel, 50% dentin, then the failure rate goes up, the survival goes down. So people were thinking, well, if I have a little rim of enamel around the outside of the tooth, that's all I need? Nope, in enamel we trust. So we want to maximize our enamel rod integration with the class 2 and at the same time engage those enamel rods at 90 degrees. And then we can have a lot more confidence that these things are not going to fall out. So a couple of things I want to talk about on this are this concept of the radius bevel. So I'll take my little wand here on the radius bevel. What is a radius bevel? So let me show you with my hands what a radius bevel is. Well, we'll be like hand puppets here in a minute. I want to show you what the radius bevel is like. So when we have two walls that are joining each other, we put a little bevel here. That is not enough. What a radius bevel is, we're going to do a long convex bevel that's going to become tangential to the two cavity walls. So it's not just a flat or a concave, it's actually a convex junction. So if I have two walls like this, what I really want to create is a radius bevel that becomes tangential or parallel to the surfaces that I'm joining. When you look at that with engineering, you minimize any stress risers in the tooth. That also maximizes my enamel integration and creates a very gradual transition from the thin part of the composite to the thick part of the composite, which is what we want for brittle materials. So these are the assets of the Clark Class 2. So we have thousands of doctors doing these. They're not falling out. I always ask people at the lectures, how many of you are doing non-retentive cavity preparations? At every lecture, the number is higher, and the doctors say they're not falling out. And so we have multiple studies that are underway, and as far as a comfort goes, we know that enamel works. And so intuitively, a lot of doctors have already made the change away from boxy preps to an enamel-driven non-parallel. So this is a great slide that really talks about C-factor, and I've got some other lectures talking about C-factor, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. But with C-factor, which is really an explanation of the problems with polymerization shrinkage, as the composite shrinks away from the cavity walls, it's always a problem. And so we've tried to mitigate the polymerization shrinkage by layering or reduce stress. Shrinkage is still a problem. But when we change the cavity preparation so that it becomes, number one, a compression joint, and number two, a very flattened preparation, the C-factor becomes favorable. So what we're going to do is, instead of having opposing walls pulling away from each other, we're simply allowing the composite to shrink toward this flattened surface. So polymerization shrinkage may actually be favorable for these super low C-factor preparations, where the C-factor can be less than 1. There's more of the composite than the tooth. And so where the composite goes around the tooth, the C-factor changes dramatically, and all of a sudden now we can stop worrying about polymerization shrinkage stress. Now we still have deep decay some places, we still have endodontic accesses. We're going to have to mitigate polymerization shrinkage, so we need good bulk fills to mitigate polymerization shrinkage stress. But the more powerful thing is change the prep. Change the prep. All right. So I hope you're having fun. We got a lot of material to power through. So grab some coffee and let's go. One of the things that's different about the Clark Class 2 is this infinity edge. And so once we allow the composite to go wherever it wants, where it's going to go anyway, we're able to get even more enamel. So instead of confining the composite to a limited area, at the Learning Center, we like to call it WST, or the whole stinking tooth. We will, on a Class 2, we let the composite wrap to the line angles. Once we've done that, it's extension for prevention. It allows us to monitor those areas and get away from putting a sharp margin deep in the inner prox where it's hard to monitor and it's hard to clean that area. So we get this wrap of the tooth that's very, very favorable for cleanliness and for monitoring. Now, one of the other problems that we see, one of the other resistances that we have to bulk filling is people are afraid of depth of cure. They don't know what 5 millimeters is. And with the Filtek One, we can cure up to 5 millimeters in the interproximal. So we built this brand new Go No Go probe. So basically it has a green, a yellow, and a red zone. And so what you can do with that is in the occlusal of the tooth, the green zone is okay, that's 4 millimeters. And then in the interproximal, you'll put the gauge in there, the probe in there, and as long as you're within the green and yellow zone, you don't need to layer. Now, Richard Price did some studies up at Dalhousie, and he looked at dentists, at us, about how we can measure what is 3 millimeters, what is 2 millimeters, and we were all over the map. It is extremely difficult to look into a cavity preparation and estimate the depth. And at the end of the day, if we don't trust our ability to know what 5 millimeters is, we're not going to trust book fill. So we built this great little probe, GoNode probe, and we'll talk at the end about where to get some of these materials. That allows us to measure definitively what 5 millimeters is and then have the confidence to go ahead and not layer when we're at 5 millimeters on the interproximal. One of the other things that's super helpful is we built the BioClear Matrix to allow buccolingual curing. The only way we can get buccolingual curing is to cure from the occlusal, the buccal, and the lingual to get 3-point curing. But if we have a metal matrix, how do you do buccolingual curing? How do you cure through a metal matrix? So the instructions are to peel the matrix away. The problem is sometimes when I peeled the metal matrix away, the composite came with the metal matrix. Or you get bleeding in there before you could light cure. So having a clear matrix and a definitive number that I know that it's 5 millimeters gives me the confidence to do these restorations and get away from layering. One of the neat things that's happened with Filtek One, and now I get some of these things early. So I had the original 3M bulk fill paste, and it was great, but it was a little more translucent than we wanted, and every once in a while the patient didn't like the graininess of the restoration, but it was a reasonable compromise because we wanted to get away from layering. So this is this great new material, Filtek One. I like to call it transitional translucency, all right? So when you put the composite in the tooth, it's more translucent, which is great because that allows the light to penetrate through the material to a full 5 millimeters depth of cure, but then as it polymerizes, it gets this mismatch. So it has transitional translucency. And so when it's done light curing, it is beautiful. I know some doctors that are using Filtek One in the anterior as a bulk fill because it really, in my eyes, it's just as beautiful as regular Filtek Supreme Ultra. So I'm not recommending that you necessarily use Filtek One in the anterior, but the aesthetics, we don't have to worry about them anymore, and we don't have to compromise and stress out that the patients are going to be upset about this gray-looking tooth from the bulk fill. So that's a nice change. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is light curing. You know, I've talked to some dental schools where they refuse to move to bulk fill because they don't have powerful curing lights. So the dental school is in lockdown because they have these curing lights with a couple hundred milliwatts of output. So we need 1,000 milliwatts minimum of output. And Dr. Richard Price is a great asset. He's really looked at these things. And so he's developed a program to check these curing lights. And I think that the 3M reps will actually come to your office with this and check the light, which is a great benefit. I'd have them come in and do that. And so we've learned a lot about curing lights where some of these issues like turbo tips and some of these other things may not necessarily get us to full depth of cure. So in summary, we need to have a powerful curing light. It needs to have a parallel optics instead of one of these turbo tips because that doesn't really help us. We want to make sure that the light is powerful, that it's been checked. It needs to be very close to the restoration. And then to get 3-point curing, we need to cure occlusally, buccally, and lingually. And if we have a translucent matrix, that's great because we don't have to disassemble things and then hope that the composite's not being pulled by the metal matrix or being contaminated and we pull the thing apart. So just intuitively, we're going to have more confidence with clear matrix for 3-point curing. And remember, you cannot get to 5 millimeters depth of cure without 3-point curing. So that's the only way we can get to that number. All right. So there's a couple other advantages to the BioFit system, and we're doing more and more courses with 3M because it's a great synergy. And so one of the things that happens with burnishing, when you take a look at the composite on my right, it looks sort of lumpy. You can see a staining margin there. And so as the matrix was burnished to try and get a good contact, yes, they got a tight contact, but it's sort of lumpity-bumpity. And you also see that those areas where there is flashing, where the composite is either leaking. Let's show you here. The composite is either leaking here or just broke off right here. So a lot of the researchers say, oh, David, the flashing is going to fall off. Well, only if it's accidental. So with the Clark Class 2, we're going to do a long radius bevel, then we sand it, we blast the tooth, and we'll show this study later. We're going to show 100 teeth at 10 years that have infinity edge margins and no mechanical retention, and they're not ditching, and it's not breaking away. So we want to expand the composite all the way to the line angle. So when you take a look at the BioFit over here, the matrix is not round. It's actually it's a tooth form, and so it has a bit of a flattened area that you get from burnishing. So what we want to do is get away from burnishing over here with a metal matrix. Burnishing, like I said, is an act of desperation. It's something that needs to go away. I always joke it's like being on drugs. Let's all get off drugs. We don't want to burnish anymore. These matrices are very stiff and they have a very broad contact. Now, to be able to do this, we're going to have to do heavy tooth separation, pre-wedging, go through this whole thing. However, when it's done, these things look like crowns. The contacts are very different than a burnished metal matrix. There's another advantage to using a Mylar over metal. When you take a look at these matrices on the left, this is Teflon coated, this is a polished stainless steel. Look at the surface that it imparts. It's a rough surface. When you look at the BioFit surface coming off of the Mylar, it has a much smoother finish automatically. It's like porcelain, and the studies will show that we have much less biofilm attraction to these surfaces that have a natural polish. So on the interproximal, we can't polish there. We'd like for that to be ultra smooth. And I do all my dentistry with a microscope, and there's a big difference between this sort of rough finish that comes from these Teflon coated or stainless steel matrices versus this beautiful smooth Mylar. They are healthier. And a smooth surface also is less prone to microfracturing and then macrofracturing. So being smooth doesn't have a downside. Now, this is interesting. We've got a traditional cavity preparation on the left that's been filled with a bulk fill, and this is year 4, and we're going to contrast that with the modern cavity preparation with a radius bevel and an infinity edge on the right, and this is at year 3, I believe. And so here we are on the left, traditional cavity preparation, burnished matrix, butt joints, they're always ditching, these things always ditch, even if you bevel them. With the compression joint and radius bevel, when you look at these teeth 5 and 10 and 15 years later, they're not ditching. Because remember, and I'm going to do my hand puppets again, okay? Is everyone ready for my hand puppets? Here we go. Compression joints also resist ditching. So when I have a tension joint, a butt joint that's either beveled or not, you get a little bit of a ditch there and then the tooth wants to break. So when we create a radius bevel or a calla lily, like we have on the tooth on the right, when you bite on this composite, because it's in compression, it doesn't deteriorate. And there's no minimum thickness as long as you're in the occlusal table. So when this composite on the right, when you look at the composite on the right, it really has almost an infinity edge at the cusp tips, and yet it doesn't deteriorate. Because composite has, and Filtek is up to 365 megapascals of compressive strength. So even though it's thin there, it doesn't deteriorate because it is in compression, all right? These composites in compression are game changers. And here's the other thing that an engineer taught me. If you ever could have the opportunity, hang out with engineers. An engineer said, David, you're putting the entire tooth into compression. Teeth that are in compression feel better when you bite on them. Teeth that have deep valleys, those teeth can be uncomfortable. The tooth is in tension. So not only does the restoration need to be in compression, but the entire tooth needs to be put into compression if we want to avoid fracturing. All right. So this is this smart contrast ratio. What I like to remember, I talked about it, is transitional translucency. When you take a look at the older bulk fill here, it had a 43% opacification. At 51%, I know it doesn't seem like a big difference. It is quite a difference. So I am not seeing dark dentin underneath the restorations. It doesn't look gray. And everyone who knows me, I love B1. I just love B1 composite. And the new Filtek one comes in B1. So my patients are really happy with the color. I'm happy with it. It's opaque enough that I don't have to worry that any dark dentin, healthy dentin, is going to show through. And that was a real problem with the bulk fills. Man, a lot of them look gray. And if you had an old amalgam and there was dark dentin in there, you don't want to cut it out. It's healthy dentin. We had poor ability to mask that with the original bulk fill. So, man, this made my life a lot better. A lot less stress. Okay, so let's go ahead and review some of the things that we're talking about: depth of cure, shrinkage stress, voids, postoperative sensitivity. So these are some of the materials that we're going to be using in the cases that you're going to see. I'm not going to go through all of these. The Venn diagram is really pretty comprehensive. Each one of these components has changed. And if you change one of these components, you may not have success. We have doctors who come to the Learning Center and say, hey, I love this, but I want to use this other adhesive, or I want to use a sonically activated composite. It doesn't quite fit. So then we have to do a workaround. So we're pretty strict on incorporating these different parts of the Venn diagram to get a good outcome. And so injection molding is really 1, 2, 3. And this is new to some of you. So I want you to listen carefully. And the great thing about video is you can always back this thing up and listen to it again. So injection molding is 3 things. Number 1, we want to go ahead and etch, rinse, and dry. And I like to do a total etch and the single bottle, which is Scotch-Bond Universal. We need to massage the adhesive into the dentin tubules for a full 20 seconds, which seems like forever as a clinician. And so you have to massage the dentin into the dentin tubules for a full 20 seconds, air thin and cure. Now that we're careful with that, and we're careful with our C factor, with our cavities, we're not having postoperative sensitivity. So we don't use Gluma or liners or any of that. I think a lot of that has come from the fact that we don't follow instructions with our adhesive. We cut bad cavity preparations, and then we sort of put a Band-Aid on it with Gluma and liners. We don't use those at the Learning Center. We're having great results with just Scotch-Bond Universal and proper engineering, and then following the instructions. All right, so we massage the adhesive into the dentin tubules for a full 20 seconds, air thin and cure, and then the next thing is we inject the flowable composite, and we don't light cure the flowable composite, and this is Filtek Bulk Fill Flowable. We line all the marginal areas, we inject it into the infinity edge. We don't cure the flowable, and then we go in directly with the regular Filtek 1 or the paste composite and push it in. It says this is a replacement for the old snowplow technique because we're injecting it instead of sort of patty caking it. And then our goal is to have about 90% of the restoration to actually be in the Filtek 1. This is going to displace most of the flowable, and so it's a lot like taking a light body and heavy body impression. We need the light body material to be able to fit to all the nooks and crannies, and then we need the heavier material for strength and aesthetics. And we get what we want by using these, a lot like taking a light body and heavy body impression. So once again, we massage adhesive into the dentin tubules for 20 seconds, air thin and cure, and then we inject the flowable composite. We don't cure that, and then we inject the regular paste composite, or the Filtek 1, into the bulk fill flowable, displacing it laterally. I'll show you a movie in a minute of how this works, and then we get our monolithic result. So this is a great case. It's done by Dr. Richard Young. He's kind of a wild guy down in San Bernardino. If you ever get a chance, see Richard's lectures. He's great. And so he has got this case partially assembled. He's got the BioFit matrix in place with the proper cavity preparation, the wedges in place. The diamond wedges are unique. One of the things that we did with the diamond wedges is the diamond wedge allows for an infinity edge, and when you go from small to large, the wedges are all the same height. One of the things that drove me crazy was with wedges, when they got bigger, they got taller. Who wants a tall wedge? Because now you're going to have a point contact. So we're grinding the wedges down. So these wedges are all the same height, all the way from small to large. And then I want to show you this little green guy here. This is called the Furkel. There's a little hump on there. We got a patent on that. This little furcation goes into when you have deep caries and a fluting, or on the mesial of a first bicuspid, you have that little fluting that always gets an overhang. And for my German friends, just so you know, I know I've learned this. In German, an overhang is an Überhang. I thought you would need to know that. Anyway, it avoids the Überhang if you're in Germany, or the overhang. And so the last thing we do to get the Rockstar polish in the areas where the matrix doesn't touch is after we use a Softflex XT disc to get the general shape, We go in with the Magic Mix in a disposable Profi cup, and then we finish it with the Jazz Polisher. This is diamond impregnated cup. So that's how we're able to achieve this two-step Rockstar polish. Go ahead and showing a different case. Here's the preoperative and postoperative. This is a case a lot like the last one that we did. We've got this pumpkin shell caries going on. We know that, that cavity progression has changed in the era since GV Black. We've got fluoride that has changed it, and so the outside of the tooth is intact and the inside is very badly decayed. There's the two-tone disclosing solution, and so it's critical that we do that, and this is really interesting. I actually went in and put acid etch on that spot right there and waited for 20 seconds. You can see that phosphoric acid does not remove biofilm. Let me repeat, phosphoric acid does not remove biofilm. So if we're going to have an infinity edge, we have to go in, disclose so we can see what we're doing, and then blast this. This is a BioClear blaster with aluminum trihydroxide. We feel that the number one reason that composites are staining is because in the area that's the infinity edge, or what other people call flashing, you cannot remove biofilm with phosphoric acid. And so the composite never bonds, turns brown right away. So anyway, we did the blasting. This is a fissurotomy burr by SS White. We're going to create a bit of a radius cut here, try to create a compression joint. I'm leaning the burr laterally to create a better stress mitigation. This is the NTF fissurotomy burr to get rid of those last little remnants of stain. And then we're going to go ahead and once that's done, go into the caries area. Now, one of the ways that we keep from gouging the neighboring tooth is we stay inside the tooth. In the old days, we would try and break that cavity wall with a 56 burr, which is incredibly dangerous and so difficult to do. You're going to stay inside the cavity preparation with that round-ended diamond. And then what we're going to do is once the DEJ caries is removed, we're going to go ahead and create a radius bevel. And once again, we're going to basically overlay the distal half of both the buccal and lingual cusps. So I started with a coarse diamond burr, and now I'm moving to the fine diamond burr, and you've got a burr list on here. And the next thing that's super critical is to take these lightning strips and cup them under the emergence profile, because the biofit matrix is going to go 1 or 2 millimeters past where we used to put the margin. And that's a benefit if it's clean. So we have to sand it aggressively. There's the biofit bicuspid matrix. Remember, push the matrix very aggressively. You can't smash this HD matrix. Now, in this particular case, the matrix looks like it's going to be a problem, but once I get the separator on here and I walk the matrix over, I'm going to expand and appose the matrix. It's laying so beautifully against the neighboring contact, and I think it's because my line angles were maintained. I don't have to do that spot weld technique. We can go right to injection molding. So I like putting a little bit of the liquid etch down first just to make sure I get good wetting of the enamel. And basically, we filled the tooth up to where the matrix was going to hit it. There's the acid etch, 20 seconds, rinse and dry. And then we're going to go ahead and massage the Scotch-Bond Universal into the dent tubules for a full 20 seconds. Now, this little pink area that you see, that's caries indicator. That is not pulp, okay? That's not a pulpal exposure. The pulp is at least 2 millimeters away. And caries indicator is not 100%, but we like to use it for demonstration purposes. So we're going to go ahead and cure the composite, and then we move to injection molding. Once again, it's the second step of injection molding. We're going to inject this, but not light cure. Make sure and inject slowly. You're actually going to see me injecting at 90 degrees to the tooth restoration interface. Watch this. I'm going to lift the matrix off the tooth. Richard Young caught this. This is great. I'm going to lift the matrix off the tooth to make sure that my flowable composite goes to the infinity edge. Then I'll come along the lingual and do the same thing, injecting slowly to let the composite go to the infinity edge. We're not going to light cure this. This kiss was only 5 millimeters deep, and so we were able to do this without doing a gingival increment. And then the next thing I'm going to do is inject the Filtech 1 paste material into the flowable composite. And you need to inject feeling back pressure, taking advantage of the thixotropic nature of composites, feeling the back pressure, sort of riding this hovercraft of back pressure. And then once you see the flowable composite has been pushed out the path of least resistance buccolingually. We'll create some gentle anatomy, a central groove that helps for light curing and also to mitigate some cross-tooth polymerization shrinkage stress. Try saying that 10 times quickly. And then we'll go ahead and do a quick light cure. We'll take the separator off, and then we're going to do 3-point curing. You can't really do 3-point curing until the separator comes off. So we'll pull the separator off, and now I have proximity, and we will do 3-point curing. And so I'll do buccal and lingually at the same time. This is a special Clark Explorer. It's real helpful if you have a very stiff Explorer to remove the matrix. Then we'll spin this out with the hemostat. And then we'll go into the sculpting. And so when we do these fairly large areas of intentional excess in the injection zone, I think the first time a doctor sees these, they panic. Ah! And then you get very good at amputating and sculpting that. And we can take a tooth like this and amputate the excess, sculpt it with the Softflex XT disc, which is one of Dr. Kim has really taught us how to use this disc beautifully. We marry the infinity edge here. We never want to use burrs for that. You can use a little Bart Parker if you have any areas that you want to sculpt on the gingival. And then we'll go into the magic mix, which is next in a disposable cup. You'll see that here in just a minute. We're going to go ahead and take floss with the contact, and on the mesial, we're actually going to use this little true contact saw because I was not restoring the mesial and there was a little bit of material there, so I broke that. Checking the contact, nice, snug, broad contact occlusal gingivally. This is the Softflex strip. We do take these across the gingival margin. Now, some of you are worrying that we're going to mar the finish there, but you really get a great polish with that, and we want to make sure that we don't have any excess. All right, so here's the magic mix that I was talking about. We're going to put that in a disposable cup. It has two different sizes of abrasive. It's got big chunks of aluminum oxide and then little fine aluminum oxide. So once you're done with this, it gets a great matte finish. And then we're going to use a diamond impregnated cup. These are reusable. You want to make sure that your assistant doesn't throw these things away because they're $10, $15. But you should be able to get 5 or 10 uses out of those. So there we go. There's the cuspal overlay, infinity edge. And so this is a compression joint. This tooth was in trouble. So I'm going to show a case like this that's 18 years old with a compression joint, deep caries on here. And here we are 18 years later. The tooth is very comfortable. I'm not worried about fracturing. We have beautiful infinity edges. So we've been through all the steps of deep margin acquisition. And so we want to go ahead and wrap up. I hope you had a good time. These are the things that we want to make sure that we do. We need to modify our cavity designs to create compression joints and infinity edge margins. If we use the Go No Grow probe or something like that, we're able to make sure that we're not going deeper than 5 millimeters on the interproximal, no deeper than 4 millimeters on the occlusal. We always want to make sure that we follow the manufacturer's recommendations for composites. Sometimes a manufacturer will tell you that their light cures in 5 seconds, and the same manufacturer will tell you that you need 20 seconds to cure their composite. It's the same manufacturer. So you need to follow the directions of the composite, not necessarily the people making the light. If we use an anatomically appropriate matrix that's basically a tooth form, we're able to do buccolingual curing that's a lot more safe, more effective. We're using the BioFit matrix in this particular case. We want to make sure and check your curing light. So you either need to check it yourself, or like I said, 3M has a great system where the reps come in and check your curing lights. They come in and check mine. And the last thing we want to do is once all those things are assembled in place, we can have the confidence to move to modern materials with modern bulk fills. And there's other good bulk fills out there. So now I'm able to have, I make cake and eat it too. I can go ahead and have the aesthetics of an anterior composite, but with all the benefits of deep depth of cure, a little bit less polymerization shrinkage stress, and the confidence that I can create a monolithic restoration in the posterior when I used to have to layer. Whenever we layer, things get more complicated. We have more voids. We have more gaps. It's not as strong. We do monolithic materials for zirconia, for our ceramics. We want monolithic composites. And so this is allowing us to move to something that we trust in zirconia and trust in ceramics. We can have that same trust in our posterior composites. So I hope you've had a great time. You can reach me at drclark@bioclearmatrix.com. And like I said, there are videos there and other videos available on the 3M website, the Viva Learning or the Healthcare Academy through 3M. I think I have 7 or 8 videos. So I look forward to your comments, and we'll see you at the next opportunity. So we've got a bunch of great questions. So I want to answer the first question was, David, what is the name of that matrix? That is the BioClear matrix. And that particular matrix, it was the bicuspid matrix. We also have the BioFit matrix for molars that comes in a 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5. Those are all anatomic and clear, and they're also quite curvy. All right, so that's the BioClear matrix. Next question was, who makes that probe? BioClear makes that probe. It's called the Go No Go probe, and it's 4 and 5 millimeter depth. The green is a Go in the occlusal, and then the yellow at 5 millimeters is a Go on the interproximal. And like I said, the only reason that we can get to 5 millimeters depth of cure in the interproximal is we're kind of cheating. We're bringing the light in from the buccal and the lingual, and you really can't do that with the metal matrix. And almost every class 2 is about 4 to 5 millimeters deep. So the ability to measure that and know that we're at 5 millimeters, you can always use a periodontal probe, but this is a very sort of handy probe. Hey, there's a great question I wanted to ask, and that was about the California State Boards. Gordon asked this. All right, Gordon, I'm going to answer Gordon's question. Gordon says, David, you need to talk with the California State Board. They still grade on a classic class 2 prep. In other words, apparently the California State Board is grading. They have to cut a GV Black prep. Okay, so here's what's really interesting. We introduced the Clark Class 2. It's a compression joint. It's completely different. It's the opposite of a slot prep or GV Black prep. This is great. Roseman Dental School started teaching this 4 years ago, and they only teach the Clark Class 2. The students at Roseman Dental School in Utah, they do not learn a slot prep. They do not learn a GV Black prep. They actually stopped teaching amalgam because so few people are doing amalgam. Not that there's anything wrong with amalgam, but they just don't teach it because so few patients are asking for it. So here's the good news. All these students took the boards, and I can't remember which board it was. The name eludes me. There's a couple of Western boards, but they took the board and they all passed on the cavity prep. And so there was 100% pass on the prep. So it's kind of like wag the dog. I mean, the tail shouldn't wag the dog, and the boards are there to serve the school. So with some slight modifications after the prep was passed off at the Western boards, they were able to do the Clark Class 2 and injection mold it. Also, from what we hear from the board examinations is that when a couple of other schools, Loma Linda is looking at doing the Clark Class 2, they are seriously considering, at least the Western regional boards, adding the Clark Class 2 as an option beside a GV Black prep or a slot prep. So Gordon, we got good news. All right, next question. What burr are we using for beveling? The way I want to answer this is we have a new partner, and that's Comet Burrs, K-O-M-E-T. They're a supporter of the Learning Center. And we've got a wonderful video on start to finish, how to cut this prep, which burrs we use for the radius bevel, and there are about 3 or 4 different burrs. So you can go ahead and email me, and I think that was Harpreet asked me that. You can email me individual questions, but what I'd like you to do is to come back to the BioClear Matrix website in a week. We are going to have the Clark Class 2 cavity prep from start to finish with all of the burrs that we used listed for you and an exact description of this of the Clark Class 2. It was a great clinical case. It's taken a lot of work to edit that, and it is just about edited. I promise you, Harpreet, that you will be able to see a full video. It's about 22 minutes that will show you exactly which burrs we used on the different parts of the cavity prep and where to get those burrs. All right. Amanda asks, in a case of a class 2 that's complicated involving one cusp, in a posterior tooth, can we do the same injection mold protocol? And the answer is absolutely yes. If you go to the BioClear Matrix website, we've got several articles housed there. And in one of those articles, I actually am replacing the mesial buccal cusp. It was a complex case where the mesial buccal cusp was cracked on my good friend, Dr. Pat Retzer, who teaches down there at University of Pacific. So there's an article on the BioClear Matrix website that actually shows you the sequence and the steps that I use to replace the mesial buccal cusp. So we do cuspal replacement, replacing 1 or 2 or even 3 cusps sometimes with injection overmolding. And so it is something that is very routine. It takes time, I think, to get good at the more complicated posteriors, but just like anything else, you practice it, you do it again and again. And now I'm restoring a lot of endodontically treated teeth. And especially now that patients are coming in with emergencies, I don't know when they're going to come back. So I'm doing cuspal overlays on all kinds of teeth. I just finished a case. We'll post that too. We have a weekly webinar at BioClear. So there's a Wednesday webinar where we're going to be showing some of these cases. These are all specific cases. And we'll be showing how to do how to overlay endodontic tooth where you're replacing a couple of cusps. So that is a great question. We had another question, which was, David, do you heat the composite? The answer is we heat all of the composites. BioClear makes what's called a heat sink heater that's able to heat the flowable and the paste all together. And in fact, we can put several copules in there. So we do heat the paste, and 3M has done extensive studies on the heating of composite, and all of the 3M composites are safe to heat. So you can heat the bulk fills, you can heat regular Filtek Supreme Ultra. In fact, it's interesting, at Taisir Suleiman at University of North Carolina, when he tested the Filtek 1, it actually got stronger, just a little bit stronger when it was heated. So there are some composites that you cannot heat and a couple of composites that you shouldn't heat because they tend to cause problems. I'm not going to mention the names of those composites. We know that all of the 3M composites are safe to heat. They took almost a year with the studies. 3M is a very careful company, and I'm glad that they did those studies. And we were heating the composite before it was studied with 3M. So if you're heating your 3M composites, you'll notice you have a 70% reduction in viscosity, a 70% increase in flow. So now that we're going to injection molding and we don't hand layer anymore, we don't hand manipulate anymore, you want a composite that's creamy and injectable and is safe to heat. So once again, if you're not using 3M, you can talk to your manufacturer or swap it out and start using Filtek. Here's another question, and this one is, David, can you restore back-to-back class 2s at once and still get the adequate contact, or does it need to be done separately? I love this question because I used to hate class 2s. I couldn't figure this out. Nobody told us what to do. So we've got on one of our Wednesday webinars, and if you don't catch the Wednesday webinars at BioClear, they're going to be warehoused, but we're going to be presenting quadrant strategy and back-to-back strategy. But let me answer you today with words the best way to do this. So if I'm doing a quadrant of restorations or back-to-back MODO, I want to do my cavity prep, get all the teeth blasted, ready to go. We're going to matrix and wedge the entire quadrant, or matrix and wedge the back-to-back. And then we'll put the separator on a back-to-back. So let's say we're doing the distal of the second bicuspid and mesial of the first molar. So I would matrix and wedge the molar and the bicuspid together if it was back-to-back. And then I would injection mold whichever restoration was the smallest. I typically do that one first. So we injection mold the one, then we take the separator off, we do our 3-point curing, then I take the matrix off of the tooth that I've restored. Let's say it was the mesial of the first molar. With these diamond wedges, you don't even have to remove the diamond wedge. You simply take the matrix off of the tooth that you restored, put the separator back on, and now instead of fighting 2 matrices, we're only fighting 1 matrix. So let me repeat. For back-to-back, You want to matrix and wedge the MO and the DO, all right? And then put the twin ring separator on, injection mold, whichever one is the hardest to get to, whichever one is smallest. Take the separator off, do 3-point curing, and then take the matrix off of the tooth that you filled, but leave the matrix and wedge on the neighboring tooth, put the separator on, and then injection mold the next tooth. You've eliminated one thickness of matrix, and this is much, much better than trying to do it independently. So what I've got to, like I said, we have a whole Wednesday webinar on that, and we'll show you some videos on that if you ever want to come back to the Bioclear Matrix website. All right, now Jessica asks, do you charge more for these restorations? Well, here we go, Jessica. Here we go. Where's Jessica? Take that back from me, will you? Do you charge more for these restorations? Let me say something. And I went to a lecture at Seattle Study Club, and they had an expert from the American Dental Association who the American Dental Association hired, and he told us that dental insurance companies have been reducing our fees for the past 7 straight years compared to the cost of living. Can you believe that? Our expenses go up, and all these dental insurance companies have been reducing our fees for 7 years, and they're going to continue to reduce our fees for the next 7 years. So I have insurance patients. Half of my practice is insurance. Half of my patients come in for Bioclear treatments. So back to your question, do you charge more for these? Well, if I have a patient on dental insurance and it's a caries case, I'm going to, fee the normal amount, and it's the normal number of surfaces, because that's how it works with insurance. But if a patient comes in and they have a failing restoration, and that restoration could end up being a crown. In other words, if a lot of other dentists would do a crown on that, I'll give the patient a choice. And I'll say, you've got a great big MOD amalgam. You want it replaced for aesthetics. In the old days, I'd do a crown. The fee for a crown, let's say a fee for crown is $1,000, and your copay is going to be $500. Typically, what I'll tell the patient is, I can do a Bioclear overlay, which is a lot more work than a regular filling, and the fee for that is about $500. So you can begin to offer elective upgrades to your patients as long as it's fair. And there are 20 other ways that you can begin to have the Bioclear method and injection molding of composite really build your practice financially. There's a lot of elective things that we do with Bioclear, like black triangles, closing black triangles. That's an elective procedure. So I know a lot of us have kind of insurance-based practices, but even in my insurance-based practice, I don't live in a fancy town, Tacoma, but the folks around here, blue collar, they can save up their money and they'll do elective injection overmolding procedures. So I hope I was able to kind of answer that question. Oh, we got a question about pedo matrices. Does Bioclear have pedo matrices? And actually, what we're using right now is, if you'll get the bicuspid matrix, from Bioclear and trim off a couple of millimeters off of the gingival, it's an awesome pedo matrix. It really actually does work. All right, now I hear this question a lot, and I might as well go and answer it about the shrinkage, okay? So Stephen, this is a question that people don't ask as much anymore, but because more and more people are heating, but I think I should answer this. Stephen wants to know, when composite is heated, does the shrinkage become larger after finishing? So I think what he's asking is, we think naturally if we put hot composite in the tooth, and then as the composite cools, it's going to shrink away from the margins. And I've had that asked a lot of times. So the answer is that the modulus, or the hardness of composite, is basically 0 in its gel state. So it's like pudding or water, right? So as water cools, it's not going to pull away from the pan because it's not thick, okay? So when you inject composite, when you inject heated Filtech into a tooth, the minute that the composite hits the tooth, it starts to cool. And by the time you hit it with the curing light, it actually is cooled down a little bit. But even if the composite wanted to pull away from the margins, it can't, because when it's in its gel state, as it's cooling, it's just like water in a pan. It's not going to pull away from the pan. And then So because the modulus or the hardness of the composite, either the flowable or paste before you cure it is about 0, you're not going to have any shrinkage problems. All right. How do you know the accuracy of a light? That's actually a lot of the light testers that we have are not very good. So one of the neat things that 3M does is grab your 3M rep. They have a very expensive, super sophisticated testing instrument that Dr. Richard Price developed. They will come into your office, and it's not just one of those cheap little ones that you get. This thing actually, they have like a little tooth with a 4mm hole in it, and then they put the tooth on top of the tester to test it in real conditions. So 3M will come in at no charge, test your light to see if it's really working at 4mm away, and that is the best way. And it's called the check mark system. That is far and away the best testing for a curing light. I mean, you can buy those little inexpensive ones and they're okay. But I mean, like I said, the 3M people will come at no charge. They tested all my lights. They put a little sticker on it, and that's part of the service. So next thing, we've got a patient, Daniel. Oh, we get this all the time. In cases where there's a pulp cap is needed, direct or indirect, is there any increase in sensitivity using injection molding or heating? And so this is a two-part question. So the question is, hey David, with all this new injection molding, if you've had a pulp exposure or close to a pulp exposure, is there an increase in sensitivity? So first thing I want to tell you is that, number one, Daniel, I love your question. Number two, this is an old conversation. We're teaching all the dental schools we work with, every single dental school that we're working with now is teaching what's called selective caries retention. We've been having webinars with several dental schools, and they are all implementing this in the schools. Now, it's taking time because some of the older faculty is kind of fighting it, but all the research tells us that selective caries retention is the way to go. So what they're actually calling it is caries excavation for pulpal protection. Caries excavation for pulpal protection. Isn't that neat? So what we're doing is deepen the prep, don't expose the pulp, don't get anywhere near the pulp. You can leave just this little helmet, a little beret of carious dentin over the pulp, and as long as you have 2 millimeters of clean dentin on the periphery and 2 to 3 millimeters covering this frank carious dentin, you should have 0 pulp exposures. We have almost no pulpal sensitivity in my practice now that we've gone to selective caries retention. So I want you to look at all the studies. There must be at least 50 studies showing that selective caries retention will eliminate inadvertent pulp exposures and dramatically decrease your postoperative sensitivity. Now, that being said, with injection overmolding, because of the low C factor, we see an even more reduction in postoperative sensitivity. All right. So Anthony wants to know, is prep design part of the training, specifically how to create compression instead of tension? Anthony, you're my new best buddy, okay? Anthony, that is awesome. This Venn diagram, one part of that Venn diagram, there are 4 parts, is the prep. If we just cut a slop prep and put a little bevel on it, it's kind of like putting makeup on a pig. I mean, it's still a pig, right? So if we don't completely reinvent the cavity prep, we're not really going to have the kind of amazing outcomes that we're seeing now with the modern Venn diagram. So yes, stay tuned. Like I said, I've talked about it before. Go to the BioClear Matrix website, go to the resources page. There's a phenomenal amount of recorded webinars there and articles, and we're going to be having even more on how to cut the prep. Now, we got one last question. Okay. If we are deeper than 5 millimeters, are you having to go back to layering of some kind? Douglas wants to know that. So that's a video we're also going to be posting. So when we are deeper than 5 millimeters, typically, to know that you're deeper than 5 millimeters, you're going to be on dentin, right? If you have an enamel down there, you're going to be close to 5. But if you're deep on dentin, that's typically going to be 5.5 to 6 millimeters. So you would do exactly what I did in the video. The only difference would be after I've cured over the dentin, we're going to take just a little bit of flowable composite and put down about 1 millimeter in the middle of the interproximal area over the margin. You want to keep that away from the buccal and lingual because that will block your injection molding later. So you want to put about 1 to 2 millimeters of Filtek bulk fill flow down along the gingival margin, light cure that, and then we injection mold, which is always 1, 2, 3. A little splash of adhesive that we air thin, heated bulk fill flow, and then we chase that with the heated Filtek 1. So in my practice, I would say 25, 30% of the time, I still need to go in and put that little bit of bulk fill flow down so that the bottom of the prep is no deeper than 5 millimeters when I injection mold, okay? So I think we're out of time. Okay. I have a bunch of great questions here. I'll tell you what, if you will email me, I will answer them all individually because I like I said, Viva Learning says, hey, it is time. And so I'd love to stay here and answer the rest of these, but what's that? I'll give my email again. That email is drclark@bioclearmatrix.com. drclark@bioclearmatrix.com. And we actually have a Wednesday webinar each Wednesday where people submit questions. So I may actually use, these are some real good questions that have not been answered. So I'll use some of these questions that we didn't get to on the Wednesday webinar, which is coming up in a couple of days. And that's at 10 a.m. till noon Pacific time every Wednesday. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for tuning in. Once again, go to bioclearmatrix.com, and then that will list some of the hands-on classes that we're doing, actually the live remote, where you can actually order a hands-on class. Either me or one of our instructors is actually there. You send cell phone pictures. It's really cool. You get your preps checked off. They're very small classes. People think it's the best hands-on they've ever taken. And it's a live remote hands-on. So we ship everything to you. We're on the phone talking to you. You cut the preps. We check them off. It's awesome. So there's live remote. There's lunch and learn classes. And then I look forward to hopefully meeting y'all someday. And if not, there are lots of resources for you. All right. Well, y'all have a good evening, and we will talk soon.